begins.
And if you were expecting to tune in half an hour ago and you were watching us live, I apologize
I am Connor
so
Rebush,
sincerely.
the new kid Nate.
Yeah. Connor was apparently in a rousy home haze and just forgot what day it was, what week it was,
Been
what year
stumbling
it
around
was.
for what I thought was 3 days, but was actually 4. Yeah,
Yeah, he is our own particular version of Encino Man, and the glacier in which he was trapped under was Holly Holm.
yeah.
So,
Sorry, Holly. I don't know how I feel about that.
anyway, on that note, before we have time to dissect that metaphor, because I really don't think it's worth dissecting. Connor, how you doing?
I'm all right. This card is boy, they're really pulling out the big guns for going against Cotto Canelo, aren't they?
Yeah,
It's a white
Dallas.
it's a white flag card. It's
Pretty
just like
much.
uh, just watch boxing.
It, the weirdest thing for me is like I broke down with Vic and Eddie last night the Bellator and World Series of Fighting cards this week. All three of these MMA cards are just fucking weird. They're just weird, strange cards that are not like they're not
Yeah.
terrible, but they're not notable at
Because
all.
I can't call this a terrible card. Like a couple fights in this card I think are really cool.
Yeah,
But then like some of the ones that probably should be more interesting are just bizarre, like Lamas Sanchez at the top. Why is that happening?
yeah,
I don't know. And then the TUF Latin America, and you know, like we have no exposure to that in our day to day lives, so we have no motivation towards the storylines they've been building for these guys. They're not characters for us; they're just some regional fighters, and so you know, no offense to them, but it's hard to really get up about it.
Well, even if you put some effort into trying to line it up, like the Fight Pass search function's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna pull any punches there. There's one autocorrect that came up and it was the dude I was looking for, but they had his name spelled wrong. So it's
There's a Bartosz Fabinski's only UFC fight is against Ferrith McClellan
yeah, that might have been it.
instead of Gareth. Yeah, that's a fun one.
so yeah, it's tough to even research these guys. There are a lot of strange. It's weird cards because they're not. It's not terrible. It's not like god awful, but it's really I don't know. Like these are the kind of cards where if somebody close to you wants to spend an evening with you, do that. Like if you've got kids, play with them. If you've got a loved one, take them out to dinner.
Zane
Like
giving hardcore MMA fans the "why not go outside"
Yeah.
speech.
yeah,
Gotta let
why
them.
not go outside? Like this has a couple of cool fights that you could check out later on
can I
DVR.
can I bring my laptop with me?
Yeah. All right. On that note, Valmir Lazaro, Michel Prezeris. That is our starting point. Dallas, kick us off.
Is it Michelle? Because I always thought it was Michael.
I think it's Michelle.
It's a good thing I'm not addressing the gentleman. Um, who was Jesse Ronson that fought Prezeris? And I actually thought he kind of won that fight, or it should have been a draw. And I was kind of frustrated with Prezeris, but in this situation, I mean, he's diligent. You got to give him that. He'll go after the whole time. The reason that fight kind of stuck in my craw is everyone was saying, oh, well, he won control because all he was doing is looking to attach, clinch, and take down. And he was doing that except for the whole takedown part. So then it just became he just kept engaging at contact range, and I didn't really think that was control, and I thought Ronson outstruck him. However, I think he'll be able to use that same strategy successfully in this matchup. I don't feel strong about this, nor do I care a ton about it, but I'm going to lean Prezeris for this one.
All right.
Weirdly, this is one of the prelims that I probably shouldn't care about that I actually do. For some reason, I like Michel Prazeres. He's like the prototypical Brazilian grinder. Can everyone hear me?
What? Yes.
Zane keeps going to a black screen for me. I apologize. You there, Zane?
Yeah, I'm here. It just everything froze for me, and I have no idea what side's getting recorded. But
Oh,
anyway,
weird. Okay, well, either way, Valmir Lazaro is like a weird, stringy sort of boxer with a lot of bizarre head movement. The Nova União guys seem to have this kind of vulnerable style of head movement, like Johnny Eduardo, sometimes Jose Aldo, where it's like really upright, and if they get hit during it, they get hurt. But they also counter really well off of it, and Lazaro is no exception. He was an amateur boxer before he moved to MMA. I think with that Nova União counter wrestling and with his counter boxing, he'll probably be able to replicate what Kevin Lee did to Perseris, and probably with a little more volume than Lee managed to muster. So I like Lazaro here.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because these are like weird, funky fighters that I kind of like.
Yeah.
Both of them, and I especially like Perseris because I actually think that while he is not a fun fighter to watch necessarily, he has a perfectly crafted game for what he wants to do. Like he's a great gatekeeper kind of talent because he goes overhand right, power double, crushing top control, ground and pound submissions. It's all.
We're losing Zane big time.
Cliffhanger. It's all the suspense is killing me.
I can't wait to hear the end of that sentence.
Shit.
Shit was probably the best ending I could have ever dreamed.
It's all shit.
I love when I'm talking for like 2 minutes and then I just suddenly, everything snaps back and you guys are making fun of like, what the fuck is he saying?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Close down your browsers and stuff, Zane. For some reason, you're all pixelated and slow.
I know. I'm trying.
Zane has like Pornhub open and another tab. he's got 4 IMDb pages open.
Fucking hell. Anyway, I like this fight. I like Perseris. I like Lazaro. I'm gonna go with Lazaro just because I think he kind of got.
He got a sex change in '88. I think we should. What was that game where there was a sentence in a big blank line and you got to fill in your own?
Like Mad Libs?
Yeah, that was it.
We should play Zane Mad Libs.
You knowledgeable son.
Alright. This is a disaster. Odds are Perseris is the favorite, -120 to -130 down to -117. Lazaro is the underdog, +100 to -105 to +108. So basically dead even odds. I'm fine with that.
Actually,
Cesar Aramendia, Polo Reyes. Connor, take it away.
This is going to be a slugfest. So even if you have no idea who these guys are, it's almost guaranteed to be fun. Aramendia is very much a boxing-centric striker. He likes to lead off of a good stiff jab and throws a left hook to the body really well, but he's very hittable. And he swings away when he gets hurt. And so does Polo Reyes, but he's got more of a Muay Thai approach on the feet with good, powerful kicks, nice elbows. He could take a hell of a shot, though he has also been hurt in the past. In the end, I think I give it to Reyes by having a better submission game and a better ground game. He's got a very good, active top game, aggressive without going crazy and losing position. So I think he probably submits Aramendia in about the second round after some really fun action early.
Dallas, anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, this should be a good one because it will be just an all-out slugfest. There's a couple guys on the undercard. I don't know much about Herrera, but in the next fight, Vernon Ramos is a lot like too, where they fight kind of old school, like this is a fight, highly aggressive. They're always winging shit, swinging for the fences. I would agree that Reyes is a little more technical, standing and on the ground. Aramendia, I always like boxers because then you're really in pretty good position. Even if you lack some distance tools, anytime anyone comes in, you're in a good position balance-wise and hand-wise to shuck a takedown, go for a takedown, or counter-strike. So, I don't know. I'm going to take Aramendia in this one.
The odds favor Aramendia. He is -183 up to -200. Polo Reyes is +145 up to +169. Close, but the odds are favoring Aramendia here, so interesting pick on it. I honestly know nothing about this. I don't pay much attention to TUF at all. So it's all a little outside of me. And Dallas, Alvaro Herrera, Vernon Ramos.
I like Vernon Ramos. I don't know why. He's like a short little, fire plug. So he'll be facing a pretty good height and I imagine reach disadvantage as well. Um, a gamer, real high output. He fights risky, not a real safe guy. He'll just kind of throw to the best of his ability, really offensive minded, and then whatever position he finds himself in, he kind of looks to just recuperate and be violent from there. I didn't get a ton of time to study on Herrera, but he also can throw big punches. He's got pretty decent knees, like quick knees as soon as they get in clinch range. I don't know why I kind of like Ramos here, so that's
All
what's
right, Connor.
I like Ramos as well. I think he's the more versatile fighter. He reminds me a lot of Kyle Magalhaes, but he's less of a bully. Like, he can take the shots, and then he will come back and keep fighting. And he doesn't seem to, like, get out of there in the first round. He had a Ultimate Fighter Latin America 2 bout with Wilmer Fernandez, in which he was dropped in the first round and came back and won the second and then dominated the third. He's very tough. He's very strong. And more versatile. So I think he beats Herrera, who's kind of a slugger more than anything else.
Odds have Ramos favored as well, minus 161 up to minus 170. Herrera the underdog, plus 135 or 130 up to plus 148. That is the end of the Fight Pass prelims, which I'm glad because yesterday the UFC was showing that they were going to do a six fight Fox Sports 1 prelim card and a 6-fight Fox Sports 1 main card and 1 Fight Pass prelim. 3 prelims is at least a little better, although we still have a 6-fight FS1 main card, which will be hell.
The layout of this card has been all over the place. It was very difficult to format a Sherdog preview for this because 2 fights got added in the last week. I'm guessing those are the TUF Latin America finalists, and it's just been shuffled around all over the place.
So now on to the FS1 prelims. Gabriel Benitez, Andre Fely. Connor, thoughts?
We really counted out Gabriel Benitez before his fight with Clay Collard. We really underestimated him. And he turned in a really solid performance. I think Collard was a pretty good matchup for him, being such a aggressive, kind of hittable fighter. He was there to be hit. But to his credit, Benitez showed really good timing on his counter punches. He had solid defense. Some decent kicks mixed in there, but mostly it was about that southpaw left hand that he landed with great frequency. I don't think it's going to be enough to get him past Andre Fely, as inconsistent as Fely has been. He got into a competitive boxing match with Max Holloway, and that was very close to the Max Holloway we're used to seeing today. I think that speaks highly of his ability to hang in there with anybody. Plus, he's happy to go for takedowns and look for submissions on the ground. He's a versatile fighter, little inconsistent, but I just think he's a little bit higher level athletically and well-roundedness wise compared to Benitez.
Can you spell that, please?
Well-roundedness wise, yeah, I'll get you that. I'll send you an email.
All right, Dallas.
So who was your pick, Connor? Benitez?
No.
Fely? I'll probably go with Fely too, and I like Clay Collard. I think we all like, Clay Collard, but I think the reason we all like him is part of the reason why Benitez was able to get by him. I mean, caution to the wind, really no semblance really of strategy or any tactics on top of that. But either way, Benitez did everything he needed to do to get that win. But Clay Collard is not the greatest measuring stick, and that could be, good for Benitez or in this case, I guess I'll just wait for him to prove it. And I think Fely's a sensible matchup for him. Fely's been a little up and down, but I was somewhat familiar with him and heard a good buzz about him before he came into the UFC. Saw 1 or 2 of his last fights and was pretty impressed. I kind of expected more from him once he first came into the UFC, but I guess I'm going to lean Fely here. I think if he can focus on his strengths a little better and keep things close range, not be out in distance and not really make it a brawl, but definitely don't go shot for shot out on the fringe. So I'll lean Fely in this one.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Benitez, I was totally surprised with what he did against Collard. What he really showed again there was that he has a very solid, like, nuts and bolts MMA game. Like everything is pretty much in place, functional, good enough to beat random guys in the UFC. But Fely, I mean, getting beat by Max Holloway. Max Holloway's just a better talent. Like that's all there is to that. And Godofredo Castro is kind of the prototypical trap fight where he's really aggressive and slick in his one area, and it was an area that Fely was very willing to engage with him in. And I don't see that being the case with Benitez. I think Fely's just the better, bigger athlete, stronger, and more dynamic.
Do you think that's maybe Fely's problem? Like either he's too confident or he has a chip on his shoulder where he like tries to prove that he can hang with opponents in their area of expertise?
Very much. He's he's the prototypical kind of MMA native, the guy who came to MMA without any background in anything, and
So
he's
it's like part
very
of his
willing.
identity to be like, I can do anything.
Yeah,
I think it's normal to push your limits though to find out where your boundaries are.
Oh, sure.
yeah, but I mean, it's also ends up with you trying to box with Max Holloway and grapple with Godofredo Pepe. You know, I mean,
Well, the idea of by pushing the boundaries is to learn where your boundaries are.
yeah.
Stay
Hopefully he
within them,
does.
and hopefully he's getting to that point. Yeah.
He's only 25, so
Yeah.
he's got time.
He's got time. I still expect him to improve and be better in the future. I just think that, Benitez having like a really nuts and bolts kind of everything, kind of the same kind of game, but just less athletic means that there aren't really any major danger areas for Fely to fall into. You know? The odds bear that out reasonably well. Fely is the favorite, minus 183 up to minus 210. Gabriel Benitez, the underdog, plus 169 down to plus 145. So I actually think that's a little close, but Fely being a measure of not really a measure of consistency probably drives those odds close. Next up on the card, Scott Jorgenson, Alejandro Perez. Man, I'm like Scott Jorgenson. He just seems like he's intent on fighting his way out of any relevance, unfortunately. So, Dallas, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is his most winnable fight in quite a while. So what? He's only won one in his last 6. Is that right? But if you look at those names, those are still reputable names. So that's probably the only consolation you can have for a really really rough last couple of years. And I kind of like Perez. He might have some potential. He's a real sharp striker, good movement, good low kicks. But to me, I mean, when you're dealing with a guy like Scotty, it all comes down to your takedown defense and your wrestling and whether or not you can do it. Scotty, I think if all things, he can still fall back on that. Even if he were to, primitively hurl a couple strikes and clinch up, and he's gotten a lot better on that with his entries and using his jab. But even I think he can just go back to basics and perhaps I'm not sure Perez has the wrestling chops to both stay on his feet or get back to his feet if Scotty takes him down, and I do see Scotty taking him down here. So he's left with that tough decision to play it safe on the feet and be ready to move, or pick his spot and sit down on a punch and try to put him out. So I just think this favors Scotty, and it'd be good to see him pick up a win again too. He deserves one.
Connor, do you think this is going to be a bounce back for Jorgensen or a new low?
I think it may be a new low or just a continuance of the same trajectory. The thing is I look back at Scott Jorgenson's fights when researching for this, and I was expecting to see some kind of marked declines in like his base skill sets, and there really aren't any notable ones. He still scrambles well, he still wrestles well, he's still a good submission grappler. It wasn't that long ago that he had a very competitive fight with Uriah Faber before getting submitted in the 4th round, and he had Faber in some trouble early in that fight. So that's kind of there. I think really the big problem is that Jorgensen is no longer capable of just looking good enough to win rounds, mostly because he's become really hurtable. Being such a veteran, having fought so many fights, he just gets dropped by everybody these days. He got dropped by Manny Gambarian. He was hurt by a clash of heads against Jussier da Silva. Zach Makovsky, nobody's idea of a gigantic puncher, was knocking him all over the place on the feet. And I think that's going to be an issue for him against Perez. What Dallas pointed out about Perez's lacking wrestling is a very good point. And I think that obviously against Jorgenson, not being a very experienced wrestler is a really big hole. But I do know that Perez has been training at AKA since his, and he was a TUF Latin America guy too, wasn't he?
Yep.
He
Since
won
his
it, didn't
time, yeah, he was the winner, right? Since his time on TUF Latin America 1, he's been training at AKA. He's only 26 years old. I think he's got a solid chance to be a good prospect. And so I have to imagine that his wrestling has come along a little bit. Plus, he's a very sharp counterpuncher. He's got the low kicks. I think it could be a get-over fight for him. Though I wouldn't be shocked if Jorgenson won. Like I said, the wrestling is a big ace up the sleeve for him here. But my pick is Perez by decision. I just think he's going to hurt Jorgenson too many times for Jorgenson to win the rounds, even if he still hangs on and looks okay.
Worth noting, you said that Perez is only 26. That means he's been a pro since he was 16.
Yeah, that's how Mexican fighters are, right? Canelo
Yeah.
has been a pro for years and years. He started as a pro when he was 15.
Yeah, that's
You
crazy.
got to feed your family down there.
Yep. So on that note, the odds have this Jorgensen is the favorite, not heavily, minus 121 up to minus 145. Perez is the underdog, plus 118 down to plus 100. So basically dead even. That seems reasonable. If Jorgensen loses this fight, that is a tough way to go. You know, he was a stalwart in the top 10, top 15 of that division for a long time, and
he was top 10 forever before this.
Yeah.
He'd been in there for as long as they probably started to make unanimous ban.
If you think about it, though, we talk about how he only loses to elite fighters, but he hasn't beaten an elite fighter either since 2010, unless you want to consider 2011's Jeff Curran an elite. And Jeff Curran was kind of a high-level journeyman himself, you know?
Yeah.
That's another one. I thought there was a case. I thought Curran did pretty well in that.
Sure,
fight.
exactly. Yeah, but the last elite fighter that he beat was Brad Pickett in 2010.
All right. On that note, Hector Urbina, Bartosz Fabinski, I believe. Connor, you are up.
I think so.
Okay, Dallas, you're up.
I'm not really overwhelmed with either of these guys. That's and I don't mean that negatively, but so far these guys have kind of yet to isolate themselves from the pack. But I mean, they deserve a little time. So Fabinski is a judoka. I don't know, Connor, do you know what his credentials are?
I don't actually.
He's been termed a judoka everywhere, and I don't necessarily know exactly what that means. But
I wrote about it once, but I'll check while you're talking.
He's a little bit like Perseris, where he doesn't like to hang out at range. He wants to come in close, clinch up, get his filthy mitts on you, and wing you to the ground and punch you in the kisser. I guess a lot of times that I don't mean that to sound bad, because he's well aware of his capabilities, and you don't see him trying to overextend himself skill-wise or technique-wise. Urbina, I would call him very offensively minded. Nary a fuck is given on the defensive end.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still, I have no problem with that. He's very, when he throws hard, and he's not so. It's almost like when you were talking about who were you talking about earlier? The old who they hold their heads in and they don't really move because they're really, even if they get hit, they're looking to counter immediately. It's like they're happy to take one to give one. Do you remember who that was, Connor, that you were just talking about? Was that Lazaro?
Oh, maybe. Lazaro's got decent head movement, but theirs is kind of awkward. I don't know. The Nova União guys are just kind of clunky. It's weird, but it works.
So either way on this one, it's kind of like, clinch takedown guy. Urbina has lost a lot by strikes. I think the majority of his losses are KOs or TKOs, and I wouldn't call Fabinski a huge puncher, but if he gets on top, he's got decent top control, and it could be just incessant punches and hammer fists to the face. Then again, I think Urbina has to be very measured and calculated, which sounds crazy, but he's really aggressive and offensive, but he needs to pick the right spots and the right locations and times to do that on the feet. Otherwise, Fabinski is just going to, clinch him to death and take him down. So I think Fabinski's probably the safer pick. That's probably where I'll go. But, I'm kind of whatever on this one.
Connor, your thoughts?
I agree with the tone and the content of what Dallas said. It's kind of a whatever fight. Fabinski wins this one in my mind just because his game is, as Dallas said, more focused. Like, he has an idea of what he needs to do to win every single time. Closes the distance. He looks to hold you there or take you down, and he beats you up as much as he can. I think Hector Urbina's very solid headlock choke game could be a real problem for him. Fabinski has found himself stuck in some guillotines in the past, and Urbina has a good one as well as a good anaconda choke and a Darce, and he uses that whole series very well. But Fabinski would definitely be the best guy that Urbina ever submitted, and so I think Fabinski is the safer pick.
Yeah, and just on a note on Fabinski's judo credentials, he was a international competitor, probably almost certainly a black belt at the club level in Poland. So I mean that's kind of like in the Eastern European martial arts scene, they have like city and regional clubs that people join and train out of that usually do like wrestling, judo, karate, even associated with like soccer teams sometimes too and all that. And so he was not a decorated judoka at that level, but a international level competitor on the club circuit. So, a reasonably serious judoka, like a notch below like Nick Hine kind of thing.
Sure.
I think this is one of the things where Fabinski, I remember talking about him when he came to the UFC, and it was very much showed in the McClellan fight too. Like, he's really powerful, but there's just not like, and so it's going to take somebody who has a more nuanced game to beat him. Like somebody who has good footwork, who has a really good submission game, who can like be craft, because he really he's the kind of guy who runs in, grabs you around the waist, picks you up, slams you to the ground, and then lays on you and grinds you into the ground for 5 minutes.
I mean, he kind of uses the Ronda Rousey game plan, but with less skill in the clinch.
Yeah. And so if a fighter like Urbina has like that puncher's submitter's chance to get in there and either land a submission because Fabinski's ground game is pretty basic, or to land a hard shot when he's just rushing in, because he will bull rush in over and over. But he's probably going to have pretty reasonable success among the lower ranks of the UFC just because it's such a consistent winning style.
Mm-hmm.
So he is favored in the odds, minus 183 up to minus 210. Hector Urbina, the underdog, plus 169 down to plus 145.
Let us not forget, this is middleweight as well, so Fabinski could probably go to the great heights of beating the Chris Kamazis of the world.
It's actually welterweight.
Oh, is it?
Fabinski dropped. He was planning to drop to welterweight but he made his debut on short notice, I think. So he stayed at middleweight for that fight, and then he went back down to welterweight.
He's going to be a giant at welterweight.
That's just what I was thinking. Now that's a sensible drop in weight.
His power, especially the way his game is such a power game, it really makes sense for him to be at welterweight.
I hope he maintains his stamina. That's my only concern there. But
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Next up, Eric Perez, Taylor Lapilus. Now, Connor, time for you to take it away.
This is the featured prelim for a reason. This fight is interesting in many ways. You've got a fun stylistic matchup. It's got relevance. Both of these guys are prospects. Perez, the one who kind of lost his way, although understandably, in some tough matchups. And Lapilus, who was kind of, I guess he outperformed expectations coming into the UFC. He came from a restricted French rule set that seemed to favor his striking style. As it turns out, he's got great takedown defense, aggressive takedown defense, you might say. So this one's really interesting. Perez is the more well-rounded fighter, just in terms of application. He uses a lot more techniques than Lapilus. Sometimes to his detriment, I think. I think Perez is kind of your prototypical, or not your archetypal jack of all trades, master of none, right? Where he He'll shoot for a takedown when he's beating you on the feet. He'll slug it out in the feet when he'd be better to grapple with you. He can take you down, but he can't necessarily hold you there. He can catch submissions, but he's not great when he has to play on the ground for a long time. It's a mixture, the sum of which is kind of less than his total parts. Taylor Lapilus, on the other hand, like I said about Fabinski before, very focused on what he needs to do to win. In both of his UFC fights, we have seen him striking and knowing that he needs to strike, using his clinch, elbows and knees, short punches and close to punish opponents that try to take him down or try to close off his distance, and then shoving his way back to long range where he can go back to work. Perez might give him some problems because Perez, he is a very good kicker. He's actually got a nice Muay Thai skill set. And Lapilus tends to stand kind of a very side-on stance. He crosses his legs a lot, which I hate, but he hasn't paid for it yet. But ultimately, I think Lapilus will be the more consistent fighter, rack up more points, and take a decision.
Dallas, what are your thoughts?
2 questions. I'm going to pick Lapilus too. You don't have to tell me, but I would guess that he's the underdog here. So let's leave that more of like a done.
Very slightly. It's very close.
Very barely. It's basically dead even odds. He's a small underdog.
All right,
Yeah.
and then where's Perez? It's been over a year and a half, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what
it's
happened
been-
to him?
Almost 2 years. I believe he had an injury. Let me see. So he had a shoulder injury that dropped him from a November bout in 2014, and I would assume that he's just been rehabbing it ever since.
Shoulder injuries are a bitch too, or MMA or any other striking sport. But I'd echo exactly what Connor said about Perez, in that when he first came on, you had to note that he's incredibly diverse. He'll go for submission attempts, takedowns. He's good in the clinch. He's a good striker, both with his hands and his feet. He can use knees. But sometimes that can be a lot more of a burden in order to not only figure out what your strengths are, what you can and can't do, and when to do them. It adds a lot more responsibility, especially like pre-fight planning, when you have time to think, as well as in the middle of the fight when your instinct kicks in. And I don't know, maybe I don't know what Perez's strength is. I do know he seems like a fighter to the core. He's a dude that is just a scrapper. Nothing easy comes against him. But I've been really impressed with Lapilus. So southpaw, really sharp boxing, good left cross. For the scenarios we've seen him in, like with Connor says, with his takedown defense, and he seems to keep himself on balance and in good position to both counter strike or pummel in, defend a takedown, get a whizzer. So I thought Perez would be favored in this one, but I do think that. The only other thing is I'm not sure how Lapilus's ground game is. I'm not sure if Perez can really go to work on him there, or whether, as long as I think he can hold his own. And Perez is another guy, real kind of unpredictable. That can be good and bad, but if he sees something, he'll go for it. And it could be a leg lock. I mean, he'll dive on shit. So I respect that in a fighter. It can be fun to watch, but it can also obviously get you in trouble. So far, Lapilus has just been kind of not overextending himself, and he's been able to keep the fight where he's strong, and he looks pretty damn technical and strong where he's strong. Strong is the key word in that.
Strong.
Strong.
So strong. Would you say that he's a mini beef boy? Is that like?
I don't even know what that means.
I don't
Frankly,
either.
I'm offended just by the sound of it.
Well, what isn't it like the common like the Goldberg thing? The heavyweights are the beef boys.
Did he say that?
I've never. I mean,
I think he may have said something like it once, and it's become a meme ever since.
That is upsetting. This is very upsetting. I will say, on the point of Lapilus's ground game, I think his team has done a pretty good job of producing well-rounded fighters. Most notably, he trains with Mikhail Lebu, who is solid, well-rounded journeyman, very good submission grappler. So I have a feeling he's probably okay there. But ultimately, I think what it comes down to is his game seems to be focused on getting back to his feet and getting back to his distance. So unless he gives up his back really recklessly, I don't think we'll probably see a lot of sustained grappling in this one.
I do think, and I want to say this is going to be like my point where I get sold on Taylor Lapilus, because I already am sold on him as a very good young fighter. But I think if he wins this is the point where I become sold that he is a fighter on his way to the top 15.
Yeah.
Rather than just an action fighter who could be fun in the division. Because unfortunately, no fault of his own, but the bookings he's had so far, he's looked good, but looking good against Rocky Lee is not meaningful. And
Sure.
Ulka Sasaki was supposed to be a hot prospect, but his game has just seemed to rapidly devolve in the UFC.
Sure.
So it's really hard to take a lot from those wins as like, a lot of what he did looked technically good, but Perez is the first fighter who has the kind of baseline standard wrestling ability to really test Lapilus's takedown defense.
And on the feet, it wouldn't be that surprising if Perez just like throws a bunch of crazy combos out there and comes out aggressive and
Yeah.
proves that Lapilus is actually not that great under a sustained attack.
Yeah, Perez has that combination of aggression, athleticism. I mean, that's really his biggest strong point for Perez is that he's both athletic and he's a top 10 level athlete. He's a very, very, very good athlete. And then he's reasonably consistent everywhere in his game. He doesn't have any point where he's a great, outstanding fighter. And that's why, guys like Mizugaki, who are sort of like the absolute plus version of Eric Perez, or Brian Caraway, who do have a very strong singular area, have been able to beat him. But Lapilus, this will be a proving point where if he wins this fight, it'll be because he has some really legit ability to beat good, strong UFC level competition.
Monumental step up in competition for him, though.
Yes.
Basically, all 3 years. Perez will be the best striker, wrestler, clincher, grappler he's faced yet.
Yeah. So, on that note, Lapilus is the slight underdog, plus 105 down to minus 110. And Perez is the slight favorite, minus 116 up to minus 130. So.
Seems fair. Very fair.
Yeah. Very dead even odds. That brings us to Efrain Escudero, Leandro Silva, and Dallas.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about this fight a little?
All right. Thanks for being more specific. So, Leandro Silva's kind of weird because he looks, if you watch tape on him, and he's a good striker, he's a mean striker, and he's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So, you'd think, like, God, this guy's going to be a wrecking machine, and he's pretty fairly athletic, and he moves well, too. And I don't know what the deal is, but some things just haven't quite clicked, or I guess maybe it's as simple as, the credentials all, separately don't all accumulate together and make one a great fighter. And that's I don't mean that in a bad way, because I thought he would, really start to make some waves. I expected him to be a little better than he was, because for Escudero, if you think about it on paper, he's almost the perfect matchup for him, because I would give him the striking advantage. He's got sharper hands. He's got more variety on the feet. He hits harder, and he's got a better submission grappling game, which pretty much is the best against a wrestler. Because if you can out wrestle him, those are all the kind of supplementary or auxiliary tools that you want to have. But maybe I'm wrong, but I'll pick Escudero here. I just think he's real experienced. He's really tough. He finds his way out of, although he does put himself in bad positions a little more than I'd care to see. But he's scrappy and he's slippery on the ground. He's excellent in transitions. It's a tough matchup for him, though. On paper, this really seems like Silva's got the offensive firepower to beat him, but I feel like Escudero is going to be wily enough on the feet, smart on his entries. He's going to be able to get inside and control him either clinch-wise or takedown-wise, and just kind of probably ride out a decision from there.
Connor, your thoughts?
Yeah, the more I watch Leandro Silva, the less I enjoy watching him. And that's, like, no insult to him, though I'm going to make a joke now. Leandro Silva doesn't have good boxing. He has good MMA boxing, which means he has bad boxing. It's like this. He's like everything I hate about MMA striking, where it's like his form on things is all right, but he will just stand around 30, 40 seconds, nothing, standing stock still, no feints, no measuring, no jabs, no movement, just no like thought process as to what he's trying to set up or what his goal on the feet is. He throws single strikes without throwing combinations. He covers huge gaps of distance with like lead right hands and jumping knees and round kicks with no feints or anything to set them up. He has these, as Dallas pointed out, these basic tools that look good. You know, he throws a good hard punch. He can throw a good kick. He's strong. He's fast. He's explosive. But it's like the skill set just isn't there to back it up. And Efrain Escudero is almost completely the opposite, right? Escudero is not a perfect technician by any means, but is well-rounded, and in his last fight showed some really solid boxing. He worked off of his jab really, really well against, who was that he fought?
Drew Dober.
It wasn't Drew Dober. It was actually his Rodrigo
Rodrigo de Lima, yeah.
His Rodrigo de Lima fight. He showed off a really nice jab, worked off it. His defense looked improved. He was counterpunching well, and then he's a solid wrestler. He does have a tendency to get into tough spots, and I think it's because he gets out-athleted. But he scrambles well, and he's very crafty. So technically, great. Athletically, lacking something. Often I would pick the athlete, but I kind of think Efrain Escudero has the advantage here, too. I can see in my head Leandro Silva hitting him with a big punch and hurting him and jumping on a submission or something, and he's got a great top game. He's a very good guard passer, good control, good submissions. But at the same time, I just don't see him ever being able to pull the trigger against Escudero, who, despite his own ups and downs, is a better, more consistent volume striker, better defender of takedowns, better scrambler, just an all-round more skilled fighter. So I'm going with Efrain Escudero by unanimous decision.
Efrain Escudero is also tough as shit, too. I mean, it's like,
never been knocked out. I never realized that. He has never been knocked out.
So the chances of Silva hurting him with one shot are really slim, and the chances of him throwing more than one shot are really slim.
Yeah.
Like, that was the thing I was going to say about Silva after Dallas was done talking, but I figured I'd jump over to you first, is that the big thing for me with Silva is that he fights for about 45 seconds of every round.
Yes.
All the rest of that time, he's just pacing, standing around, grinding a guy against the fence, just nothing going on, no urgency. And he is like, he reminds me, he's basically Eric Perez without the aggression. Like, he is a top 10 level athlete who just doesn't have a lot of interest in actually winning rounds.
Yeah, or no like coaching on how to do so, you know?
Yeah. And so it is really tough to pick a guy like that to win fights. Like, against somebody who has a much better approach. It's just hard to pick him. I mean, that's kind of like the Uriah Hall thing, where you know, going in against Robert Whittaker, it's just like, well, Whittaker is aggressive and will actually punch him for every minute of the round.
Pretty much. It's like, I guess Leandro Silva is like a completely unsurprising fighter. You're never surprised when he wins because you're like, yeah, he should be winning. But you're never surprised when he loses because you're like, yeah, he loses. You know, it's just like this complete flat line in terms of expectations.
It is, absolutely. The odds on this actually favor Silva somewhat, which, go figure. Minus 137 up to minus 150. Escudero, the underdog, plus 150 or 110 up to plus 125. So that seems like a reasonable bet to me there, because
I'll be honest. I would be nervous about betting on Escudero because he has been so up and down.
He has.
Since his 4-fight losing streak in the UFC like 5 years ago, he's been, made some improvements, lagged in areas, and I would not be surprised if Leandro Silva could win, particularly if he gets to the ground and works his submissions. But I don't want to speak so lowly of Leandro Silva because of my expectations and his technical skill set that I'm like saying, oh, he couldn't possibly win this fight, because he absolutely could.
No, it's exactly the kind of fight that Escudero has every ability to lose.
Yeah, it's tough to call.
It is. All right, on that note, Enrique Barzola, Horacio Gutierrez, this is the welterweight, or the lightweight finale of TUF Latin America 2. We might still be a bit brief about it. So, Connor?
Enrique Barzola is awesome. Have you watched this guy? He's awesome. He's such a weird fighter. He is like, he reminds me of, not like Keith Jardine, but he has this essential stiffness to his movements, so it makes him really hard to time. And while his defense isn't that great, he's just like jerky and bizarre, and he puts these weird combinations together. He'll bust out random spinning strikes. He's like what a guy like Leandro Silva's idea of what striking is supposed to be looks like when he like can employ it naturally and with a fluid sense of movement. But
maybe Emmanuel Newton.
Sure, he's kind of like Emmanuel Newton, and everybody knows how much I love Emmanuel Newton. He's kind of like Emmanuel Newton. Man, he's kind of an outfighter by nature. He likes to move around at range. He likes to feint and pot shot, and he will use that to set up some pretty nice reactive takedowns as well. He's not airtight on the ground in terms of control, but he's pretty aggressive. He'll take strikes if they're given to him. He'll look for submissions. Horacio Gutierrez is much more of what you'd expect from like a guy who's in the finals of an Ultimate Fighter. He's solid in a lot of areas. He's primarily a counterpuncher. He's got a really nice counter left hook. He throws his combinations together well. He tends to start a little slow because he needs to get his opponent's timing. But once he gets his rhythm, he does string his shots together really nicely. Maybe it's like an emotional pick because in studying him, I got really weirdly attached to Enrique Barzola's style, but I think Barzola will win this. I think it'll probably be a submission in round 3 because he's got toughness, weird style that I think will give Gutierrez's desire to time him fits, and he's a better grappler. He's just a more aggressive, more complete grappler. So I'm going with Enrique Barzola, and I am interested to watch this one.
So that's kind of interesting. I'm somewhat interested in this as well. Definitely prioritize Connor's opinion over mine because I did try to study up and watch some tape on these guys, but not to the point where I could say I did so thoroughly. And you're right on Barzola. Is just weird, herky-jerky. Almost looks kind of jittery, like the kind of person when you first put them in a fight and they look kind of tense and all clenched up or whatever. But there are times when, that can be a big advantage, just like it was for Keith.
It doesn't work for most people who look like that, but it works for him. You know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of a Zuma Nelson. And he's not nearly as good as a Zuma Nelson, but if anyone's ever watched the boxer, a Zuma Nelson fight, he is like a nightmare to time because he's just like a statue until he moves, and then he's a statue in a different position. It's lightning quick, it's twitchy, it's so strange, but it's so bizarrely entertaining.
Well, and even though it's not the way it's intended or usually taught, the end result of that ends up to be kind of like a broken rhythm striker, right?
Yes.
Like, he's hitting angles, swinging at angles, and attacking just at tempos that you're totally not expecting.
Yeah.
I actually really kind of like Gutierrez when, watching tape on him, just because he did look really solid all the way across the board. And he did remind me of a boxer because there's that whole feel-out period where when he comes out, it's not that he's entirely complacent, but he seems like he's absorbing data, all about, if I fling this jab, what's the guy's going to, what is this guy going to do? What is he doing with his feet? How does he react when I close the distance? How does he react when I backpedal? And he does seem to just slowly find a groove and start putting on some pretty impressive handiwork. The biggest question mark I have. I just have no idea how good his takedown defense is, nor do I have, a good an idea of how he's going to hang on the ground once, if he does get put there. And Barzola definitely seems, at least he definitely is, fearless, and he is not afraid to go after takedowns and pursue that aggressively. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I did kind of just become a little more akin to Gutierrez, so I'll pick him. But I don't know who's going to win. But I do agree this should actually be a pretty fun scrap to watch.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the odds have Gutierrez favored. He is at -144 to -155. Barzola, the underdog, +133 down to +120. So close odds. Gutierrez slightly favored. That brings us to our welterweight TUF Latin America 2 finale. Enrique Marin versus Eric Montano. Dallas.
We're going to let just Connor tackle this one.
Okay, Connor tackle this one, and we'll take Dallas's pick afterward.
I'm pretty sure Eric Montano is the brother or some relation of Augusto Montano, who had that fight with Cathal Pendred, and I know I said this last week about Patrick Walsh versus Dan Kelly, but that was the worst fight of all time. It was Montano Pendred was just awful, and honestly, for the first time in his career, it was not mostly Pendred's fault. Montano, and I know it's unfair to conflate him with someone that I assume is related to him because they're on the same team with the same name, but Montano's kind of like his brother. He's kind of a counterpuncher to a fault. He kind of waits around a lot for perfect shots. He has no problem letting himself get backed up into the fence, and I think that's been a big problem for him throughout his career. Um, he's not bad, but he has a pretty limited skill set. You know, if he counters, it's going to be a right hand or a left hook, and that's basically it, which makes him pretty predictable unless he gets you out of there in the first round. And he's not a tremendously hard hitter, so on the flip side, Enrique Marin is I don't know, kind of a hard guy to get a handle on. He's he's not any more strategic than Montano, really, in terms of the way he thinks about a fight. But he's very aggressive on the ground. He can take a shot, maybe a little better than Montano can. His problem is that because I do expect him to get Montano down. His problem is that, like we saw with Steve Kennedy at last weekend's event, he grapples like his opponent is obligated to grapple with him. You know, like he doesn't really have a sense of making sure you stay on the ground. He's like grappling like it's a grappling competition and not a fight. But I do think that because he can take a shot and because he's so aggressive in that phase, that has never been Montano's strength, defensively speaking. I think he will probably submit Montano in the second round. I'm much less excited about this fight than I was for the last one, as you can see.
Would you say that Eric Montano is the Diego Lima to Augusto Montano's Douglas Lima in a much worse pairing of in like the C grade Diego Douglas match?
Yeah, probably.
All right.
Isn't Montano kind of unremarkable? Like really reactive, really defensive?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like it's just like a guy who doesn't seem to be that strong or that powerful or that fast, and then skill-wise, it's like he doesn't have a wide variety of techniques. He doesn't have great defense. It's like he's just a guy fighting, and he's not bad, but he's like nothing stands out.
That should be his nickname.
A guy fighting.
Just a guy fighting.
Hey, there was a Japanese fighter whose name was a guy, wasn't it?
Eric Montano's nickname is almost worse than a guy. His nickname is Perry. That's basically like saying a guy, right? I don't know if that has some special meaning in Mexico, but Eric Perry Montano doesn't really roll off the tongue.
It doesn't. All right, Dallas. Given Connor's analysis, who are you now picking?
No, so the only notes I had down for this was that Montano was unremarkable. Like, it's weird when you watch him that he made it to the finals. Way too reactive and defensive. I did put he's got a decent check hook, and he's not necessarily weak anywhere, but just really defensive. And he seems to play off what the other guy does. Not that that's that unusual, but maybe his game doesn't seem so well suited to be a counter fighter. But he made it to the finals, so I mean, he must be doing something right. As far as Marin, is that how you say his name?
Marin, I think.
Marin.
I had down for him he's got a good chin because he did take a couple shots, and that he should probably have the grappling advantage here. And he's a pretty aggressive grappler. But those are literally, I watched one fight each and tallied a few notes. So listen to Connor, basically.
You taking Marin though? No.
Yeah, because I don't want to pick Montano.
Okay. The odds on this are Montano is the underdog, plus 164 down to plus 145. Marin is the favorite, minus 178 up to minus 210.
If Montano wins this, we will deserve all the shame that we feel afterwards.
All right.
High level shit analysis I just pulled off. I mean, I don't think it's the rap.
All right. Up next, a much better fight there's much more interesting to talk about, and it's probably the best fight on this card. Jose Formiga, Henry Cejudo, Dallas. Take it away.
So I was pretty hesitant on jumping on the Cejudo bandwagon at first, and he's really proven himself in a lot with his boxing, which is, I don't know if I want to call it rudimentary. I would call it basic, but that doesn't matter because it's highly, highly effective. Where, in the past, I thought Formiga would have been a really good matchup for him because he'll just go batshit crazy on the feet. And eventually, as soon as he can latch onto you, his transitions, his back takes. I mean, the dude is a high level grappler, not like Aoki type where he's chaining submissions together, but he has an excellent understanding of position, and he's just absolutely deadly in transitions. His striking isn't terrible, but it's always camouflage for an entry. And even though he can, hit more traditional singles and doubles, usually everything comes from a clinch or a waist lock, or he'll kind of half-heartedly try to grab a single and then just keep on penetrating until he can wrap up a leg or a waist or clinch up and go from there. But so that being said, I think if Cejudo is really smart in this fight, he should do nothing more than almost let Formiga come at him, because I think his boxing is sharp and crisp enough that he's going to be able to just dab him up when he's coming forward. Maybe if, I'm not expecting it, but if Formiga really changes his entries and the way he's fought in the past, that would definitely increase his chances. But usually he'll chase motherfuckers down until he gets his hands on them, and after that, his submission grappling is outstanding. Bad matchup, Cejudo, even if he's not extremely well versed in jiu-jitsu, the dude his wrestling credentials speak for themselves. He's not, going to be a punk in transitions, and he is not going to be easy to do anything to. The only chance I really give for Formiga is maybe if he can catch him with something unexpected from the outside, or his back take game is that nasty. There's still certain positions wrestlers, it's not that they're ill-equipped for, but they're just that they don't have the years and years on the mats that they do. Back takes being one, but still, Cejudo's balance his base is just heavy as hell. So it's just a terrible matchup for Formiga. I'd like to see him do okay. It's not. I don't have anything against Cejudo. I would love to see Formiga to come through and choke him out, or at least get in a good couple scrambles with him. But this should be Cejudo's fight to win.
All right, Connor, your thoughts?
I think Formiga will make this competitive. I think he has really come a long way as a striker, very recently and very quickly, to the point that he was dropping Wilson Hayes in their last fight, really sharp counter-punching. I think Dallas, he's actually changed that kind of bull-rushing approach and really seems to lay back and wait for openings now on the feet. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to his grappling, because he's not like he's hitting reactive doubles or anything. But against Cejudo, he may have some opportunities there, because Cejudo, I agree with what Dallas said. His boxing is it's not great, but he just goes and just uses it a lot, and he's overwhelming. It's very, very basic, but very effective because he knows how to just pour it on. But because it's basic, he doesn't have great defense. He really needs his hands there. When he's throwing, he's there to be hit. Formiga can snake in some right-hand counters. He'll have opportunities. We also don't know anything about Cejudo's submission grappling skills. Mostly because we've never seen him, but Formiga is one of the few guys who will happily scramble up onto your back from a standing position in the clinch and latch on for rear naked choke. So I think those are Formiga's openings. Ultimately, though, I think Cejudo has this matchup locked down because of the things I already mentioned. His volume, obviously his takedown defense is superb. He's not actually been that successful in taking opponents down, but I don't think he really cares to, because he uses his takedowns as opportunities to land strikes on the breaks, in the short spaces between clinch entries and exits. He's actually very, very good at it, much like Frankie Edgar. He's, as long as you're trying to defend his takedown, he's happy. It doesn't matter if he gets you down or not. So I think for Formiga, who is not actually as great defensively in wrestling as most Nova União fighters, and who probably won't get that many opportunities to work on his back takes, and who, despite having good accurate punching, is a little too patient and probably doesn't hit hard enough to really worry Cejudo. I think ultimately Cejudo is going to kind of just swarm him and overwhelm him, for like a unanimous decision.
Yeah, it's very likely that Formiga's big jump in his technical striking game came as a result of him finally making enough money to train like a real fighter. He was the guy who was like living in a shack out in the jungle for like his Tachi Palace days.
Wow. And he's like, hey, I hired a boxing coach.
Yeah, now it's probably like boxer. I think he was like a motorcycle delivery driver for most of his MMA career. And he probably has been able to put that down recently and
Good for
actually
him.
train full time.
There's a lot of truth to that. He halfway through his career, and I think he was still undefeated at the time. He made a post on the underground, and people, with his record, and people were like, "Wow, damn, you're pretty good." And he was like, "Oh, well, can I have some money? I want to make it to America. I want to hire a trainer." And so, actually, a good story for him, though. I mean, way
Yeah.
through it.
And he's made some serious strides. Like, it shows he has the innate talent, and he's obviously very teachable. Because it was only 2 years ago that Joseph Benavidez was just destroying him on the feet, and now he's outstriking Wilson Hayes, who was not a bad striker.
Well, more importantly, he was outstriking Zach Makovsky pretty well.
Yeah.
And Makovsky's a much more studied striker than Hayes, who's really a more of a bowling ball with arms.
Actually, I think Hayes is pretty good. And so when I was gone for that 6 or 8 months or whatever, I didn't go back. So I didn't see the Juicy and Wilson Hayes fight, and that sounds like one that I should.
Yeah, it was good. It was solid.
Formiga's big flaw is that he took the foot off the gas in the third round and literally just coasted for the whole round, except for like 30 seconds of brilliant offense at the very end. But and that will kind of be a death sentence against Cejudo, who doesn't take his foot off the gas for anybody.
I will also say that this would have been a much less of a slander a week ago, but that Cejudo might have a little of that Ronda Rousey boxing going on, like a much better version of it perhaps. But it's that thing where it's like, when she was knocking out Alexis Davis and Betch Correia and all that, like, yeah, okay, it's not technical, but she was by far the most aggressive, pressing, powerful woman doing it in the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't Cejudo recently win a fight almost entirely with his boxing?
He wins most of his fights entirely on the feet. He rarely gets anybody down, though
Yeah.
I think the threat of his wrestling does help. But the thing is like, Cejudo has also he had a good deal of trouble with Chico Camus.
Yeah.
Who's not like the greatest counter puncher in the world, but is just tough and has good timing and relatively good technique. He had a good amount of trouble, and people were really revisionist about that fight after the fact, because everyone was like, "Wow, Camus was competitive," and then revisionists came along who said, "Actually, Cejudo really easily won," but it was a tough fight. It was pretty close.
Yeah. It was a very tough, close fight. And, Cejudo, my point being, not that necessarily Cejudo's going to lose this, but he does have the kind of boxing that it could be like, somebody could come along and just tear it down at some point.
Lots of lateral movement, lots of angles, lots of good distance management. I mean, we know Demetrius Johnson can do that. Formiga might be able to kind of replicate that.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm interested to see this. I think this is the fight. This is like Cejudo's Chris Weidman, Damian Maia moment, where this is a fighter that you're kind of like, if you beat this guy, you're an immediate title contender.
Agreed.
And a sensible one, even. I think this is a big fight for him to win, because I do think Formiga's dangerous, and I think he presents dangers that he's dangerous in a way that other fighters Cejudo has faced. I mean, Camus, Carriazo, Kimura was a decent submission grappler, but not an electrifying one. But Camus and Carriazo aren't known for their great finishing ability. These aren't knockout artists. These are dudes who have to outwork you and outpoint you to win fights. And Formiga is he's a finisher. If he is going to beat you, it's most likely going to be because he hurts you and then submits you.
Former #1 in the world.
So, I do think this is this is that point where if Cejudo wins this, he should be on a short list for the title shot. There's no reason to wait at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, this will authenticate him if he wins.
And Cejudo is a big favorite for being as the fight it is. He is minus 470 to minus 500. Formiga is the underdog, plus 415 down to plus 325. And I would say those odds are really pretty long.
They don't really bother me. I think most people probably expect Cejudo to win. I expect to. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us picked Cejudo to win, right?
Yeah, I think this is a trap fight for him, but I think I pick him to win it.
That's why they feel like they might be shorter, but really it's like a chance that Formiga could win. It's all a quick transition, or he hurts Cejudo. Things that he, is not certainly going to happen. Things that Cejudo has proven tough enough to deal with in the past. So
It's the first
okay
fight
for
I'd
me.
recommend, an easy low damage bet on Formiga.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. He's certainly
Oh,
got a shot.
Throw a
let's
10 or
see.
20 at him. Can't go wrong there.
Formiga inside the distance is plus 550. By submission is plus 650.
Oh, so,
So
chance bets, but worth taking a look at for those.
yeah, I would almost say that if you put $5 on Formiga to submit Henry Cejudo, that may be not the worst idea in the whole world. That brings us to our co-main event: Ricardo Lamas, Diego Sanchez. Connor, take it away.
Our co-main event, I almost got excited when you said those words, and then I remembered what the co-main event was. Diego Sanchez, man, like, it's just not fun to watch him fight anymore. It's really not. I don't care how, you just can't, you just watch him, you're like, he's going to get cut, he's going to be bleeding, he's going to absorb brain damage, and he's going to think it's awesome, and I just imagine him in 30 years, like, having some kind of debilitative brain condition. I really do. It's not fun to me to watch a guy who has no signs of improving or stopping it from happening just willingly get hit in the head. That's Diego Sanchez's thing, though. It's notable to point out that Sanchez has not, who's known for his jiu-jitsu, and that was really his solid-ish wrestling, jiu-jitsu and aggression, whereas things that got him into the UFC in the first place. He's not gotten an actual submission, like by a grappling technique, since 2005. It's been 10 years since he's submitted anybody. And it's been a long time since he's actually controlled anybody on the ground.
Actually,
He had a
what?
submission by punches.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it was actually earlier than that. It's 2004. It's Cruz Chacon at King of the Cage 35.
So there you
That
go.
was his bread and butter, though. Top control and batter the hell out of people with good positional knowledge.
Sure, and he did show that he still has the submission knowledge, too, against Gilbert Melendez. He came shockingly close with the guillotine in that fight after he dropped Melendez. But, I don't know. I feel like this could be a matchup in which Sanchez has some moments. Because Lamas, we know, he's kind of inconsistent. He's hittable. His defense isn't that great. But you can't possibly pick Diego Sanchez to beat Ricardo Lamas. It's like moving down a weight class is going to make Diego Sanchez the fighter that he has been struggling to reclaim for half a decade now. Diego Sanchez, the saddest thing about him, and I know I'm spending this whole time talking about him and not Lamas, but he's a story here, I guess. Diego Sanchez is always talking about how hard he trains and how hard he works, and it always just bums me out to hear, because I get the sense that he doesn't realize that just doing the same things over and over harder is not going to make you a better fighter. In fact, it's going to slowly tear you down. And that's what's happening. And props to him. He's got great longevity. He's been doing this for a long time now, but he's not getting any better, and I don't think he's mixing anything up. I think he's just going in, getting beat up in the gym every day, getting beat up in every fight, and just thinking, like, I don't know, like, the guy is just crazy enough that he thinks he's going to get back to a title. It kind of breaks my heart. So I think Ricardo Lamas, good low kicks, underrated counter striker. He's got good timing when people come in. He can feint and set up his strikes. He's a solid, if unremarkable, wrestler. He's a very good top control, dangerous ground and pound. I just don't see any phase in which Sanchez has a serious chance.
Except with the judges.
You can never count out bad judging.
All right, Dallas, what's your thoughts?
So I know Diego used to be at 170, but did he not occasionally participate at 185?
He fought a couple middleweights, yeah.
Okay, so now he's all the way down to 145. That is way
And
down.
it's like it's going to turn his career around, right?
Well, the only thing I disagree about with what Connor said is that if you watch Diego back in the King of the Cage days, which I watched a lot of, his striking was, hardly there. He could throw a few punches, but it was all a distraction for him to come in. But the dude was a killer. He was a grinder, not like a collegiate type wrestler, almost like Formiga, where he just had to come forward and he would find a way to get his hands on you and take you down. And I wouldn't call him a submission fighter. He had knowledge of that, but what he really did was dominate with position. So he would swarm people and basic submission stuff, a lot of back takes, a lot of rear naked chokes, but he was just like a bully back in those days. his striking, and I don't know if it was for better or worse, but who was it that he hit with a high kick? But his striking really came leaps and bounds to the point where not only was it serviceable and functional, it actually looked pretty good.
I thought he looked pretty good around the time of his Clay Guida fight, which is what won him the shot at the title with BJ Penn.
I think that might have been the left high kick fight I was thinking about.
Yeah, he was pretty solid there, and I think it's regressed ever since.
Yeah, but in really the Ross Pearson fight kind of pushed me overboard because I hardly ever use the term robbery or get too dramatic, but to me that posed a serious problem. And I won't go off on too bad of a tangent, but Goldberg still drives me nuts with this. It's like, if you are aggressive, that there's Webster's dictionary and there's the unified rules. So every time Goldberg says, but he's clearly winning control and being more aggressive, for both of those scoring points, you have to be successful in an offensive technique. They're all in there. You can't, like run forward and try to clinch and fail, or run forward because he's trying to either clinch and do damage and strike, or clinch and complete a takedown. When you do none of those things, that is actually ineffective aggression.
Which is why, to my mind, they should just knock aggression off the thing altogether. Because if aggression only matters if you're landing punches, then why not just score when you land punches?
Actually, in the fan posts, when I first came on Bloody Elbow, I wrote a little poem called Ode to Aggression and Unified Rules, and because it's completely redundant. And how many times do you hear people talk about control, and especially now aggression, they made the number 2 most important, which is crazy, because if aggression only counts when you're completing effective offense, well, effective offense is either
It's already the number 1 criteria.
Number 1, effective striking and grappling. So not only is it totally redundant, but then people like to subtract it and add it back in and give it more value. But
it opens a window for subjectivity.
And there's already plenty of those windows open in MMA scoring. You know what I mean? So to me, the whole aggression thing, and Diego is a good reason for that. I mean, I don't mean that to be bad. We all love Diego because he's a fighter. He's fearless. He'll always get back up, and I do genuinely respect that about him. But unfortunately, just the way that a lot of his fights have gone, and the fact that he's been rewarded for it, did the opposite of identifying a problem and making it better. It propagated the whole thing. So, and I hate to say that's nothing personal, but because of that, I don't want to see Diego win a match on barely being effective, but really trying hard. Trying hard isn't a positive scoring parameter here. So. The actual fight, though, by the way, I think Lamas is a good example of what Diego could have formed his game into if he didn't decide to go gung-ho with the whole reckless gunslinger thing. Because when Diego's fairly composed, he does okay. I think if he just looks for kicks from range and tries to work short combinations and work his way inside, but that's like so far astray from what he does nowadays. I'm not even sure why I'm talking about it. So to me, Lamas has a similar skill set to Diego, but he applies it very intelligently. I'll never forget when he choked out Cub Swanson with a head and arm triangle. Cub's a long time black belt and a slick grappler. So I think that's real indicative of Melendez being able to use what he has to maximum efficiency, and I think he'll do it now. On top of that, he's got a good chin, so if Diego does ring his bell, I think that's all it'll be, a moment that Lamas can clinch up and recover or shake off eventually. So, yeah, I like Lamas here.
Yeah, I would also note that, Lamas is an easy top 5 featherweight. He's not, we talk about, he's got these, he doesn't do everything perfectly or anything like that, but he's an incredibly good opportunist. That's the biggest thing about his game, is if you make a mistake, he will capitalize on that mistake. If you leave him an opening to hurt you, he will hurt you, and if he hurts you, he will finish you, almost certainly. And, Diego Sanchez, Gilbert Melendez was top 5 when he and Diego Sanchez fought a really close fight in 2013. But Gilbert Melendez is not, and has never been, a great finisher. Melendez is a guy that has to beat you and outwork you. And that's always a fight that's going to give somebody like Sanchez a lot of opportunities to kind of get in it and make it ugly and stick with it. The idea of putting Diego Sanchez in there with, the very, top-tier talent in a division right now, it's just ugly. There's no good reason that Lamas should lose this fight, and he shouldn't. Yeah?
it's got to be said, Diego Sanchez has never been stopped except by the doctor.
You know what? Maybe it won't happen this time, but it has to happen sooner or later. Like, it will happen. And if it, like, this is the absolute setup fight for Diego Sanchez to get knocked out.
And I got to say that weight cut, anytime a fighter comes in that low, yeah, there's a chance that's going to be hard on him. It's going to drain him. And then if you look at the level of activity of the way Diego fights, I would say that chance is highly likely that he's going to be affected by that.
Yeah.
Like, this is just set up for Diego Sanchez. The only way it could be set up more is if they'd booked him against Chad Mendes or Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
Or the Grim Reaper.
Then it would be, but Lamas is, it's not like Lamas doesn't have power. He's got the power to catch people and hurt them badly. And it's an ugly fight. So the odds on this ugly fight, then Ricardo Lamas is a sizable favorite, minus 569 all the way up to minus 825. Diego Sanchez, the underdog, plus 475 all the way down to plus 370. So I do not see many good reasons to bet on Diego Sanchez in this bout unless you just you really strongly believe that the judges are going to dick Lamas over like nothing we've ever seen.
Well, there was a prop bet for Sanchez by bullshit decision.
There should be. There really. That's what the Sanchez by decision is like minus 125. All other four.
Everything else is a giant underdog.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to our main event. Neil Magny, Kelvin Gastelum. Dallas, take it away.
How recently was Magny brought in?
He was brought in 2 weeks ago, I want to say. Let's see.
So short notice, either way, that will jeopardize his winning streak.
11:03, so 2 weeks ago.
And he's still on, what, like 7-8 fight winning streak, Magny?
Lost to Damian Maia.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's
UFC 190.
Gastelum is one of the guys that I didn't really get into that season of The Ultimate Fighter that much. I did watch it, but man, he was, to me, what the whole idea of The Ultimate Fighter kind of is supposed to be or used to be. And man, he was a diamond in the rough. I was really surprised the way that he came out and the way he continually took steps up in competition and did pretty damn well. I kind of thought he was a one-dimensional wrestler at first, but man, he is, either that or I hadn't noticed these things before. Maybe they're always there, but he has picked up a lot of just little things to make him very stable across the board in a lot of different areas. I actually really liked Magny on that season of The Ultimate Fighter. I don't know why, but he stood out the most. I thought he was going to do really well. He's got that crazy reach, so I was all high on him, and then he had a couple stumbles, and now he's doing really well. His gas tank goes for days, and I think he was always a great sprawl or a good sprawling brawler, and he has really gotten much better, like 2 or 3 levels above where he used to be in his core competency. So this is actually kind of tough for me to call. I would pick Gastelum generally over a lot of the pack, but I do think Magny's very, very unique, and he's always kind of consistent. He's always a gamer. He doesn't really show up and he's not prepared. It doesn't say his game plan or his strategy always plays out to the fullest, but he's a gamer, and I think that his strategy will work pretty well against Gastelum. Hasn't he kind of, even though he's improved, like, hasn't he just looked really shitty in a couple fights? Like
Gastelum, yeah. Gastelum's conditioning has just continued to be a major problem.
Yeah, and now we got a 5-round fight against a guy with long, like cartoonish reach proportions, good striking, excellent takedown defense, and a gas tank for days. So, I guess just safety-wise, I think Gastelum's safer, but I'm interested to hear what the odds are in this, but I would consider Magny an extremely live dog. Gastelum's best bet is if he does get Magny down, to sub him out or put him out right then and there, because if Magny's got the Energizer Bunny thing going where he'll just keep coming at you and keep coming at you, and every time he does, I think he has a better chance of starting to turn the tide and implementing his offense. His reach is going to be better. I like Gastelum's boxing, but I can see Magny, pulling out. It would take his, an A game all the way across the board from him, but sprawl and brawl, keep him on the end of his punches. I think Gastelum's a better finisher. That's maybe I'll pick him, but I don't know. I don't feel confident either way on this one.
That was the most non-pick I've ever heard, I think. Like, the whole time was, I really like Magny, but I guess I'll pick Gastelum.
Well, because maybe I wasn't clear about my non-pick. I think Gastelum should win, but short notice for Magny, he's got a really good strategy to beat him. If the slow Gastelum comes out, and I don't think he's got a prayer. And still, that's Magny's got to be at the top of his game. So my prediction is fuck you, Zane.
No, that's more your state. That's where you live. Anyway, where you got? What do you got, Connor? What do you got for a review?
If I think you could go back through our Vivisection episodes and just pick a random one and have a pretty good shot that we discussed Neil Magny. Doesn't it feel like that? He's
Yeah.
fought 10 times in the last 2 years. He's kept a crazy schedule for modern MMA, and here he does so again, stepping up on short notice to fight a very tough opponent. It could be another Damian Maia matchup for him. You know, could be a tough one. He was really outclassed on the ground against Damian Maia. He really, and I think that was because Maia got started quick and kept control. And Magny's biggest problem is that, well, two biggest problems. One, he's a slow starter. He takes a good amount of time to get his range, to get his timing, and to sort of feel confident enough to start putting his strikes together. And then the other thing is that, and we've said this many times before, as I just said, but Magny is like so committed to well-roundedness that he just takes himself out of his area all the time. You know, he'll fight a guy, he'll be beating him up, and then he'll clinch with him and try to take him down against the fence. I'm like, Neil, just make distance and hit him in the face some more. You're almost there. And he just, sometimes he makes these bizarre decisions. That being said, it's not like he's bad on the ground, particularly from top position. He's got a really good ground and pound, nice control from half guard, but his overall ground game seemed like it lacked a lot. Granted, it was Damian Maia, which is, you know, he's made a lot of good grapplers look bad, but I think that may be Gastelum's edge here. If Gastelum comes in well-conditioned, well-prepared, which he has before and also has not, so that's why it's so hard to call, then I think he could probably land some big shots, keep Magny against the fence, which he is a little too easy to put against the fence, and then drag him down. My A pick, like Dallas, I'm all wishy-washy here. My A pick is Gastelum by like a third or fourth round submission after maybe hurting Magny on the feet. But if Gastelum's not well prepared, the fact that this is a 5-round fight, even though Magny's never had one, I think is a huge credit to him. I think that Magny is a perfect 5-round fighter because he just goes and goes and goes. He never has to go nuts and really turn up the volume. He never lowers his pace. He's just consistent and tireless. So I think for 5 rounds, if it goes to the 5th round, I think the chances drastically improve for Magny to get a stoppage.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really the measuring stick on Gastelum more than anything else than Neil Magny, because if Gastelum's well prepared, this is a fight I think he is the picture of a title contender, a future title contender. He's a great athlete with a powerful game. He's a strong finisher. He's aggressive, and he's really tough. Like, he's just the absolute picture of what makes someone a title contender in the UFC. And he should beat Neil Magny, absolutely. But, you know, this is like, I mean, Magny has that Michael Bisping thing going on, where, like, yeah, those elite contenders should beat him, but he's always going to be there, and he's always going to be tough, and he's always going to make you work really hard. And if you're not prepared, if you don't show up, he will outwork you.
And as we said, we've said this recently, but how much better and more consistent has Bisping looked since the creation of 5-round non-title fights?
Mm-hmm.
He's gotten some main event chances, and he's turned into a really good late fighter, as I think we all kind of suspected he would be if he ever got to that title shot.
Yeah, and that's so with this bout, I mean, it's really just how, you know, where's Gastelum's camp at? What is he doing? Has he figured it out? Because if he hasn't, then he's got like a round and a half to beat Neil Magny before he's probably gonna lose.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a weird place to be, but Gastelum seems to have really put himself in that corner.
But then there's other times when like the fight I'm thinking of, he started out really bad, and then by the second round, it was like, look, he's gonna gas out. But then he like totally recovered and seemed to come back and finish decently, relatively
That
speaking.
was Nico Musoke.
Misoke, that was exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah, and Musoke is good, but also not quite as not quite as dangerous even as Magny. Like, just not the same consistent performer. Musoke is more of a good athlete who is also good early and then fades.
Yeah.
Different kind, because Misoke is not, he's pulled off some arm bars, so a little bit of a threat. But really, I
Yeah.
think Magny kind of reminds me a little of Matt Brown in the fact that people are always going to want to see a dude like that, and if he loses once or twice here, they're not going to be saying, "Oh, he sucks, cut him." He's a great test for everyone. Fuck it, I'd like to see Neil Magny versus Matt Brown. He's the kind of dude I think maybe he'll never be destined for a title shot, but he'll always have a strong fan base.
Yeah, and so Magny is the underdog in this fight, plus 257 to down to plus 210. Kelvin Gastelum, the favorite, minus 271 up to minus 310. So I think that's reasonable just on this. Like, if Gastelum is in shape, he should really win this fight. Magny is willing to make mistakes, creates a lot of openings, and Gastelum is just so much more powerful and so much more dynamic a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But Gastelum's also, he's a hard dude to trust right now. So it's an interesting main event, and it's an interesting main event on top of a card that's not that interesting. So
Yeah, it has its moments, but
it has its moments. It's a weird card. Like I say, it's a weird card in a very weird weekend of MMA.
Yeah, agreed.
So
I got a couple betting picks.
yeah, betting picks, throw them out.
I think Taylor Lapilus as an underdog is a pretty solid bet. I wouldn't throw a huge amount of money on it, but it's an interesting fight. I think he's got a solid shot there. You got to have an underdog chance bet. Chusier Formiga has a shot, but I actually think Neil Magny is probably the better chance bet. His odds are lower, but again, Gastelum's been so inconsistent. Magny is a good late finisher and has an endless gas tank, so I think Magny's a pretty solid chance bet there. And then I wouldn't bet on Ricardo Lamas by himself, but he's pretty much the sure thing you can get. So, and who knows? If Diego Sanchez wins this fight, I'm just gonna quit. I don't know. I don't know what to do. But maybe if you need Lamas on like a parlay or something like that, he's probably a good addition to that kind of a bet.
Yeah, I could see if you did like if you had a parlay going of like Fely and I don't know Escudero, you could maybe anchor it with Lamas at the top or something.
Yeah, as like a reliable pick.
Yeah. So that all makes good sense. You can find me on Twitter over at These Ain't Time. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find Dallas on Twitter at Uncle Justice. You can find all three of us on Bloody Elbow. Please give this video a like. That's the thumbs up thing right below it. That helps us out a bunch. And subscribe to MMANation.com so you can get live updates on all our Bloody Elbow interviews and analysis. We'll be coming at you with more videos. Prospectus, 6th round, knuckle up, all the stuff. Got fights and fights and fights and fights coming, and so stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.